Were you going to warn us this time?
Yeah.
Were you trying to warn us?
You seemed a little concerned that what you say can stay off air, so it's like, have a warning.
What? Was I watching the clock? No way.
You should have been.
Yeah, I would.
You know me.
I would never admit to any sort of less than legal options. Live on the air. That would be ridiculous. So, but yeah,
certainly be very unprofessional.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
We're so professional.
Certainly where possible. As a paid adult with a job, I absolutely endorse people that it's like, look, man, if you want them to make more of the thing that you love, you need to pay them for it, because that's how it works in our society. That's why I go see bad Star Wars movies. Oh yeah, I started with that. So anyway,
are there bad Star Wars movies besides?
Yes, absolutely.
Besides the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one, the sixth one, and all the ones since.
I can drop him out of the chat, right? I can just remove from stream right there. Yeah. Why would you include the originals in that list?
No, I didn't.
Just trolling.
I was saying
4, 5, and 6.
No, I wasn't saying episode number. I was saying in order of release.
Oh, I see.
Return of the Jedi.
Because they did do that stupid decision with that. Yeah. That was very dumb.
Yeah, that's true. I guess that was confusing. I would not claim that the first 2 Star Wars movies are bad. I don't particularly like them, but I understand why people like them. That was my peace offering.
Hold on. No. I'm going to get this one thing. To make sure I heard you right, and then we're going to drop it, and it's going to be fine, and I'm going to bottle this hate up for later. And when it's fermented for 20 years, then I can sip it. Did you just say that you don't like Empire Strikes Back?
Yeah, I was going into it with big expectations, and I was a bit disappointed with it, because everyone talks about how great it is, and I was just sort of meh about it. But
yeah, I mean, because it's up there with Blade Runner as far as the 2 best science fiction movies on every list and every vote ever, pretty much. So
I like science fiction.
Better than the second one.
I wanted to make sure everybody understood. I'm selling pitchforks and torches over here for $5. Hit us up on Patreon. I'll get you guys your sample. I don't need to burn you at the stake. The entire internet's got me covered on that one, I think. So
speaking of Patreon, if you want to support us, you can head over to our Patreon and give us some money, and you can join us on Discord, where you can yell at Ben personally and directly. And support Justin if you so choose. Don't do that.
We'll even join in on pitchforks just because we're bored and that's what we do.
I'm opinionated because people keep making the mistake of telling me that they agree with me, so I just dig in deeper and deeper. So,
if you were looking for the more professional Dresden Files podcast, this is the unprofessional, even more unprofessional. While we weren't recording, where we just talk about wherever we want, which. Today
we're talking about the Witcher
show. Right?
Yep. Right. We're talking
because
about the Witcher show.
Someone made a mistake of Netflix. Saying an opinion about the Witcher show, and other people had to fight about it.
Somebody was wrong on the internet, and this cannot stand. So
therefore,
it wasn't just that I disagreed with him. It was the layer, the breadth of the disagreement.
Dude, recap. Andreas, what did you say?
I thought the Witcher show was meh, average.
You said it was 5 out of 10.
5 out of 10. So I agree here, Justin. 5 out of 10 is where average is. That's where we start, and I'm going to go up and down from there.
I'm just making sure everybody understands, because some Americans are bad at math, and average they're taught in school that 70% is average, but that's not correct in this case. You put a 5 out of 10.
Passing. It's not the same thing.
Yeah, well. For a bell curve, it is. So if 70% becomes the middle, I'm just.
Yeah, but then
let's not quibble about
percentile.
So,
I've heard that in other countries, a 10 out of 20, for example, in France, is equivalent to our 7 out of 10. So there are other countries in which people have been taught differently about.
Hot take: there are other countries.
I hope that opinion isn't too spicy for you, Justin. That there are other countries.
I'm not the one that has problems with other countries. So, but you invoked France, and I take that very personally. So, EG only needs 2 kinds of people. So,
but I mean, I believe a passing grade here is 02. So,
what does that mean?
I don't need another conversion.
We go. It starts with -3. That's if you didn't show. 0, 0 is if you didn't do anything. And then anything above that, like 0, 2, then you get 4, 7, 10, or 12. It's actually been changed. It's been made this way to match your system, so that it can be translated. So like a 12 would be
yes,
an A.
Of course, recognize this directly.
A 12 would be an A, for example, and then the 10 would be a B, and so forth and down. So a 7 would be that's a C, and then you have
There's
D,
not
and then you have
numbers intervening though. Like even if I was assuming like, oh, it's okay, instead of letters they gave it like ranks, right? So like 1 through 12, but a 10 is a B. So there's no B plus and A minus.
They're working in base 12 apparently for no fucking reason.
I'm not entirely sure about the conversion. I just know it was changed to match international standards, so that there could be a translation. I think it's actually have it here in front of me.
One additional quibble: if there is anybody who is not adhering to international standards, it is America and the education system, right? Like the metric system would be an example of international standards. Does not at all relate to what we do here. So
from what I understand, you use something called the ECTS scale, and it would 12 is A, 10 is B, and that 7 is C, 4 is D, 2 is E, 0, 0 is FX. I haven't heard about that one before, and then -3 is F.
Weird. Yeah. Yeah, see,
do you know what FX is? Is that a thing?
No,
it's a channel.
Because whatever you think you're looking at for our standard, like we're not aware of it anyway. Of course, we're also not teachers, so. But anyway, okay. So 5 out of 10. So now that we've established that, why did you not like this show to the point of a 5 out of 10?
I mean, I feel like you're framing the question a little. In a biased manner here, or not correct. Like I don't not like it.
Biased?
I don't love it. It's average.
Absolutely
it's okay.
Not.
So it's not like I don't like it.
I mean, obviously I disagree though, but like that's it. That's all you could be is like it was just average. That's what you came
just
with.
Okay.
What would you put it? What would you put higher than it? What would you put lower than it? I guess. Like maybe that would help clarify it.
I mean, of just TV shows. Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know where to I wouldn't know where to put Game of Thrones, for example, because it starts so good but ends so shitty that I honestly don't know where to put them.
So on a scale of like incest and killing children, like where would you compare these two shows? Like
we're just TV shows, and that's another fantasy-esque TV show, but I don't know how to really rate Game of Thrones, because if I were season 1 to 4, it would be 10, and then but then it gets dragged down so much that it might not even be 5. I don't know if I have recency bias, but I think Stranger Things is better for sure. But I just finished that 2 days ago, the new season.
Mm-hmm.
That would be if I take all 4 seasons together, it would be a 7 or something, or an 8 out of 10. What else have I watched recently that can properly compare to? I mean, there's all-time great shows, like Breaking Bad, which is 10 out of 10. It's The Sopranos is 10 out of 10.
How was something like the 3rd season of Daredevil or something like that?
I didn't even watch it.
Or the Punisher.
Didn't watch it.
I'm trying to think of something middling.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I guess it could help to do Netflix shows, but I definitely wouldn't necessarily do it to the Marvel shows, right? There could be a bunch of different differences there, but Stranger Things is probably
to Arcane.
Okay,
maybe.
Didn't watch Arcane.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Okay.
I'm supposed to, but I have an agreement to watch it with somebody, and we never get around to it. So that's why I haven't watched it. I don't think all the Marvel shows are better. Every single one. There's not a Marvel show I think is
even I don't agree with that. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is just my long-standing bias, but I do think the Witcher show was better than probably most of the Marvel shows.
Witcher's better than most. I don't think so. I think all the Marvel shows are better.
Well, but you're not giving us anything to latch onto.
I'm not saying
right?
it's
like
perfect.
What
it was
do you have a
definitely not
beef
perfect.
with?
But...
Like, well, yeah, but
And
like,
Witcher,
what would have brought it up? For example, like because
there's a lot of the storylines that I just don't care about. There's like when we get to those parts, we're like, okay, can we get back to Gerald and to Ciri? Can we get or Yennefer or Dandelion? And then like the elves, I don't give a shit. This mage storyline over here, I don't really care.
Did you watch?
There were very large chunks of the show that I did not care about, and so if those weren't there, then objectively it would be better. Or if they had been made more entertaining, they would have objectively been better.
So this is including the second season, like that bit with the elves. That's the part you had a problem with.
No, not that I had a
you
problem
guys are
with
definitely
it.
Watching it for a different reason than I am. So
not that I had. It's not that I had a problem with it. It's that I didn't care about the characters, so I wasn't invested in that storyline. I care about, like, my favorite bit is probably Ciri, like hanging out with the Witchers and the training. Those couple of episodes, that was really good.
Sure.
The second season, that's probably my favorite bit of the season.
Okay.
So yeah, there's some storylines I don't care, which basically means there are probably some characters there I don't really care about. The plot is okay. It's a little disjointed, and I think it's gonna hopefully it's getting merged together more. The special effects the creatures are really good. A lot of the other effects are kind of a little on the low end, like a little. You can tell, like, for example, I just watched the last couple of episodes because I actually didn't even finish season 2 because I was like, I don't really care. But then we're going to talk about it, so I finished the last 2 episodes that I didn't watch. There's like a fight scene where someone gets his teeth punched out, and you just tell it's very clearly CGI, which is a little annoying.
How dare they not actually bust out the teeth of people?
Right, like.
I mean, I kind of have the same quibble, but I also have to restrain.
Don't go for that action slow-mo sequence. Someone get blood and teeth flying.
Yeah,
if you can't do it right.
No, there's a better way. I just only watched the first 2 episodes. I've had a lot of other stuff with I've done a lot of stuff with Witcher, but for the show, I've only watched the first 2 episodes. In that first episode, there's a whole thing where the last of the 7 dwarves that he kills. You know what I mean? That the first episode is Snow White and the 7 dwarves. The last guy he kills, it does this thing where the head falls off, but the camera moves away quick enough that you just kind of get the sense of what's happening. There are better ways there are smart ways to do special effects that don't, that kind of hide the weaknesses and play to the strengths of your budget. And I think that was a good example of how they did it right in that instance. But, so I could understand having problems with the special effects because that's an issue of production and execution as much as budget. It doesn't have to be a high budget to have effective effects.
It's been a while since I saw season 1. What I think was the troubles I remember season 1 is I think the costumes were awful. That got so much better in season 2, like so much better. It was both kind of jarring, but also interesting the way they chose to do the storyline and the timelines in season 1. But I did like that it was more brought together in season 2. But what is it that you? Where would you put it, Justin? The show,
I mean, 5's way too low is part of the problem. Like, I'm not sure I'd go lower than 7, right? Like, if you look at the casting, the casting is spot on. I can kind of understand a little bit of not caring about the characters, but I don't need to be invested in every fucking character that's on the screen, right? I don't need to be like, oh man, I really hope that this elf that I can't remember his name doesn't get his head chopped off in 2 more episodes. That's not why I'm watching it, right? Because as you've established, we know who the main characters are. And I feel like a lot of what the show has been doing is been focused on how what's going on in the world is shaping these characters more so than necessarily their effect on the world, which would be a difference of like, you know, a more Americanized Western point of view, in my opinion, right? We've got the Avengers. Shit doesn't happen to the Avengers. The Avengers happen to shit, right? You know, like there's a difference there. Whereas like Geralt is fucking nobody, right? Like he's literally like fine. He's the last Witcher, whatever. But like when armies come rolling in, he didn't fucking stop Nilfgaard. He didn't save his people. He saved one girl, and he was pissed off about that, right? So there's a tonal difference in how a lot of that stuff gets set up as well. And for me, like just, you know, briefly, the world building is way more interesting than hardly anything else that's going on, right? I find myself going and researching a lot more on the lore and the history of the world, which frustratingly isn't there because, again, that's not really kind of the story either. You know, so like I'm interested in, you know, like the collision of the spheres and what do they call them, the totems or whatever they are, and that sort of thing. So
obelisks or whatever they are.
Obelisks,
That I also find interesting. The overarching world building, not so much the politics, which is more in the forefront.
Right. So sure, I mean, if we want to look at like the interpersonal drama, then yeah, okay, maybe it's bog standard science fiction, right? But there's still machinations in play that we don't understand, as far as I'm concerned. Like, I don't know if it's addressed elsewhere in other media, but because my main introduction is to the show, right? I haven't read any of the books. I've played like 10 minutes of the game so far, mostly on account of time, if anything. So, you know, but yeah, like, no, I don't have problems with the CGI. I don't really have problems with the characterizations. I'm really not enamored with Yennefer as a character all that much, you know, or the wizards in general. Like, if anything, the wizards
is supposed to.
Right. Well, I'm making that clear because I always hear like, yeah, I always hear about like, well, it's Geralt and Yennefer and Ciri to the end, and I'm like, I mean, we could lose that bitch and I'd be okay with it. Like, you know, she's cool and powerful as a character, but yeah.
I think I've only read this, but apparently the season takes quite the detour from the books, which I don't know because I haven't read the books. But at least the whole thing, Ciri, Yennefer, and Geralt to the end is, you know, that's in the games. That's after all the books have happened. So I guess that relationship between those three will develop. It's not there yet.
Right.
I think this is strange because the games, obviously, they took place in three different games. They have minor time skips in between them, and Ciri was only a character in the third one. Yennefer was only a character in the third one, and they already had a back history established. And so it seems that the show is trying to show the establishment of those histories that you could eventually then get to the third game.
It should be the books, like Ciri is and Geralt. I think that's like what the books are about. It's about saving Ciri and all the things that are happening in the show. That's what happens in the books. I just, from what I understand, they've made different choices in the show now, whereas season 1 was very true to the books. Season 2 was not. Again, I wish Colin was here, because then he could chime in on that, because I haven't read the books. But yeah, and you know, I mean, I really like the adopted daughter, adopted father trope. Like, that's always a hit. And that works well.
Well, it's even better because he didn't necessarily choose it, or he didn't understand what he was choosing. It was one of those, like, he left up to fate what should have been a decision, right? You know, it's parallel and paraphrased from what I tell everybody who plays D&D. Never let the dice decide what needs to be a sure thing, because you will get screwed every time. You don't ever pick, you know, like, okay, well, you've got the car and the $10,000, but you could see what's behind door number 3. That is not how you make decisions. And you don't take the money in your hand versus the law of surprise like he did. And it's funny because it's like this one decision almost shapes like the entire story in this character, right? You know, and again, like, it's, so far as we've seen anyway, and so far as I'm familiar, it doesn't matter, right? Like, if anything, like he's almost a side character in the story that centers around him entirely, right? Because Nilfgaard is coming and conquering the whole place for whatever reason. Ciri has this amazing power that nobody understands yet, where, you know, she might be a hybrid between, you know, humans and elves somehow. You know, what we could call her half elf, whatever would be more recognizable. But her power seems to affect the, you know, the obelisks and the monsters. And Geralt's just there like, well, every like third episode I have to kill a monster because that's my job. And the other two I can spend traveling and womanizing. Like, that's pretty much what I'm here for. And so it's just like, I mean, personally, he's not even the most, you know, entertaining character at 1,000-foot view, right? He's just there to protect Ciri as much as anything. But yet the story is about him. You know, it's not about Nilfgaard. It's not about, you know, the fall of Cintra and all of these other countries. It's not even about the elves reclaiming Cintra, you know, or anything else. That those are big, entertaining stories, you know, for a high fantasy. But yeah, it's just kind of interesting.
From what I understand, playing the game, the point of this universe is something that he says in the very first episode of the show, that when I have to choose between two evils, I will rather not choose at all. Does that come up a lot in the show? Or is it just that one line?
I think he mentions it a lot in season 1.
Okay. Well, so that, I think that the point of the Witcher universe, as I understand it, through Joseph Anderson, but also playing the game, which for Witcher 3, is that it's kind of supposed to be just more kind of morally grimdark twists on fairy tales. So it's supposed to be kind of this moral atmosphere or amoral atmosphere. What do you do in a moral, amoral world where there's multiple genocides and cover-ups and lies and machinations? Is there such a thing as innocence? And for the most part, there isn't, right? Which makes something like Ciri an interesting character, and Geralt kind of Ciri and Geralt kind of the opposite poles of that, where Ciri is early on in the show, again, I haven't finished the show, is kind of the innocent, and Geralt is he's the guy at the other end of his life, where he's just tired of it all. He doesn't want any pretension. He thinks it's all pretension. He's doing his job. He won't kill an
3-day off retirement, man.
Well,
so that kind of moral dynamic, I think, is central to the universe.
It even goes deeper than that, and it's almost a little fourth wall breaking, right? Because the books, or at least the show, this whole pretension of morality is focused on how we would see it, right? That basically, like, this world used to not have monsters. Then the, conjoining of the spheres happened, and then monsters did appear. And basically the presumption is that, humans always good, monsters always bad, witchers in between, right? And witchers are supposed to protect us from the monsters. And what he realizes is that, sometimes the monsters are just folks, and sometimes the people are bastards. And that's kind of where he's different a little bit, right?
I thought with conjoining the spheres, the humans were the invaders.
Oh,
the humans are not from that world. The elves are from that world.
But humans are from literally
invaders.
The monsters
are literally from capital E Earth. To quote again Joseph Anderson, humans are literally from our world, literally from this planet, third rock from the sun, right?
So they're the missing, legion. Is that what we're doing?
Something. It's that kind of thing, except they just get pulled from, something else, because of the conjoining of the spheres.
Right. Yeah, you're right, though. Yeah, the world did belong to the elves, but also the monsters also invaded from a different sphere, theoretically.
It also subverts the whole the mystical idea of the elves, because the elves are just sort of jerks. Like they're as xenophobic as the humans. And
if anything, the elves are just like people. You know, so the elves are just like people, but also they have the disadvantage, like a lot of fantasy, right? Where elves live really long times and it takes them a really long time to repopulate. And then there's humans. Look at them. They're just fucking all the time. They're just pumping out babies every 20 years, those sickos. Can you imagine it? And that's kind of like what you run into with a lot of like D&D that tries to explore that, right? You have the it's like rabbits invading, just any primate, right? Primates, again, kind of just a shoe-in for us, obviously. But in this case, the primates are the elves and the rabbits are overpopulating the place. Look at what they did to Australia, those bastards. They took over the whole continent, so it's kind of interesting if you play into that. And yeah, you'd probably be racist too if you were literally like there and then they just show up out of a portal and they were like, so this is our country now? And you're like, excuse me? Family's been here for like 1,000 years, so I'm not saying it necessarily xenophobia is good, but in this case it's one of those probably understandable where it's like, if I was here and somebody like shows up and you're like trying to fight him off from stealing your house and then like 3 more of his kids show up in the same fight practically, you're like, what the shit is going on here? That's probably about what the elves felt like.
What happens with, there's a line in the second episode that you're choosing to starve. What happens with that whole elf thing? How are they choosing to starve? What does Geralt mean by that? He says that to the elf leader.
It's been too long. I don't
remember that.
Oh, Filavandrel was staying in an area where he was fighting and having to run around and basically be a scavenger to survive instead of leaving and going to another place that would be easier to live. Essentially, he was choosing his own battle and that he was losing.
Right. So rather than being about the survival of his people, he's fighting for the land. It's a vengeance thing. Yeah. Okay. Consumed by hatred and vengeance. Right. And
so they were staying in the area when it didn't make any more sense to, and they needed to move because otherwise they were going to starve and die. They didn't have the medicine or infrastructure and anything. And so with that, I guess he goes to the forest and finds Francesca.
Speaking of which, I already didn't care that much about that storyline personally, but I mean, at the end of the season, I was like, well, I got no sympathy with every single elf that went along. I'm glad the brother spoke up a little bit, but he could have tried harder.
That was I mean, one thing to circle back to that I definitely agree with Ben is that I do feel like it's a little bit more grimdark, right? Like you definitely have, you definitely have like everybody is a bunch of bastards, even Geralt, and he's just trying to be less of a bastard. He's at least one of the people that seems to see everybody's a bunch of bastards and doesn't judge you for it, necessarily. And so when he shows up and the humans say, go kill the monster, he'll go investigate the monster, and if it needs to get put down, he'll put it down. But, he's not just going to go in there because, that's how it works. Like, I'm a witcher, you're a monster, let's do this. Like he actually learns and investigates and stuff like that, which, is to me is some of the charm of the character, right? Especially in this world. But
I think the most emotional moment for me was the death of Roach 9.0 or whichever version of Roach it was. Like that actually, I almost got a little tear. I was like, oh man, loyal really? Companion. I get you every time.
The character development do that for you. Find out about his wife and kids and how his land was stolen by these human invaders and all of that stuff. That really did it for you.
No, I don't know what you mean. I was talking about Roach.
I'm just saying, like, you're going to critique the show for not having characterization and then be like, the most emotional part was the horse that didn't even say anything.
Animal companions, they get me every time, man. In I Am Legend, I cried when he had to kill the dog. Like,
the dog had a personality. Me. Roach didn't even stand on one building. How do you even know it's Roach?
Because all of his horses are Roach. If it's its name is Roach, and it will be loved. And hands off the horse.
That's probably why
he's very protective of his horse.
Because there's 4 million of them, and he kills one every 3 episodes. Like,
you got a new Roach that look different than all the other Roaches. I liked how he's like, you're not my usual type.
Right. See, and stuff like that is good if they at least acknowledge it, right? It's like, you always hate when it's like they make those little changes and they try to like not even acknowledge it, like the fans don't know. But it, and that's another thing, like talking about propping up the show with the casting and shit like that. The fact that he goes to bat for the fans and he'll be like, actually, in the book, in this passage, that's not what was said, or something along those lines, or, pushes for the more realism or accuracy in this case, so.
Yeah, I mean,
yes,
I
Henry Cavill is definitely the best thing of the show.
Right.
Not that there aren't other good things, but he's definitely the best thing.
Right.
I'm kind of conflicted, but that's not because of Cavill, because I think he's a very good actor. I think Geralt is a very hard character to play. Like, he's just, he's a little bland in a way.
Yeah, it's that kind of gruff. It's almost like Carl Urban as Dredd. He has
He
has to have a lot of. Well, he has to have a lot of restraint because you want to do the whole acting thing, but Geralt is like.
Yeah,
that's Geralt.
He did a surprisingly good job.
Yeah. I mean, I always tell people with Carl Urban, so he has one of the hardest jobs in that movie, but he also had like the easiest the easiest audition, where it's like he just shows up on set and then he frowns like this. And then it's like, perfect. Can you do that for 2.5 hours? And they're like, you're hired. So, we all know Carl Urban can act, but he's still like, to me, he was perfect for Dredd in that moment. I don't know if people are going to do it better, so, and it's the same thing with Henry Cavill, like he might not be this guy who's literally a book and video game character who's literally an impossible character, but I think he's as good as we're ever going to get. Viggo Mortensen and Aragorn, we could go down a list, right? But like, I think he's going to be one of those that's going to be really fucking tough to beat, at any future point. So,
just like, I was gonna.
Yes,
I was gonna do like a stupid joke about the original Kirk, whatever his name is, William Shatner. Just like William Shatner and Kirk. Nobody will ever do a better Kirk than William Shatner, right?
I mean, I'm inclined to agree because he is the character. I mean, Chris Pine is not a better Kirk. Let's just start right there.
Let's just say it like this: nobody ever did a good Kirk.
Oh,
So, are we going to fight about this? Did anybody watch Strange New Worlds yet?
No. Can we please not just? We already started an argument with Star Wars. Can we please stay away from Star Trek?
Watch Strange New Worlds if you like Star Trek.
No, thank you.
It's a good Star Trek. Yes,
I'll get to it at some point.
You got to open up, director. Your bigotries can't steer your whole life.
I watched The Witcher show in a week because of this. Because I hadn't watched it before.
Actually,
I didn't say watch Strange New World by next time. Like I said, you should watch it. If you like Star Trek, especially, you should watch it.
I don't know.
What
if
would
I
you
do
give
like
it, Alex?
Okay. What did I think of The Witcher show?
It was
better than I expected.
Because you set the bar at 5 out of 10.
My bar expectations was set pretty low because of the drama that was happening when it started, and people were like, "Well, Triss doesn't look like she does in the games," and then some people working on the show are getting kind of uppity on social media of like, "Well, we're actually basing it on the books, but the Geralt design is actually based on the games and not the books," and so they're picking and choosing, which is fine because they wanted to do a blend of the games and the books. But then people had gotten kind of shitty about it. And I just kind of held off for a long time. It's like, I didn't have much of a push to do it until apparently we're going to argue about it. I was pleasantly surprised with the execution of a lot of things. There were some things that fell flat. There were characters I really didn't care about. There was a few actors that I don't think they pulled off the characters in the way that they needed it to, or something. So I don't know, 6 or 7 out of 10 maybe. It was like enjoyable. I'll continue watching it.
Yeah, I think it's pretty enjoyable too. And I don't hate, like I said, I don't hate it. I don't dislike it. I just don't love it. I'm lukewarm about it.
It is interesting to me in a way that a lot of streaming shows aren't interesting to me, because the world is kind of a fascinating thing. You can do basically anything with it. And one of the most, maybe this is a hot take, it's probably not that hot of a take.
That'll be a surprise.
But is it? Would you say that that Geralt is actually a heroic character? And heroic, is he heroic, or is he still kind of grim, dark? There is no such thing as good. I'm not talking about necessarily his dialogue. I'm talking about his actions. Like is he actually? Is he subverting the grimdark by being heroic?
He's still an anti-hero, in my opinion, right? Geralt's not a paladin. I mean, I guess you could make the argument that he does, if you take if there's a good and an evil, I don't want to make the choice as like, his, line in the sand or whatever, then that could be one thing. But he's not. There are plenty of times where he kind of gets pushed into doing the right thing. He doesn't go out of his way to save and stop people. He doesn't draw hard lines in the sand and make any personal sacrifice. Really, the most personal sacrifice he has is taking care of Ciri, and he does a half measure of that until season 2 anyway. Well, I mean, of course they spend most of season 1 linking up, but like it's like the middle of season 2, I want to say, before he really starts even taking care of her and kind of just being an actual parent to her, as opposed to just a traveling companion. That it's like, shit, how do kids work? Do I have to feed them? Are they self-cleaning? How is this happening? So I wouldn't call him heroic, but I mean, sure, compared to a grim, dark setting, he's the best they've got. But like, is he drawing a line at any point to stop Nilfgaard? Is he rallying people to the cause? Like, there's nothing per se heroic that he's doing. He's just doing the best he can as he moves through this shitty planet.
He's heroic on the small scale. He's heroic on like, these people need help. I'll help these handful of people. This town, maybe as big as it gets, because he is not a politician, and he's not going to be involved in the politics on the very high level. That's where Nilfgaard is interacting with Cintra and Redania and all of the others. Like, that's not what he does. That's what the sorcerers do, and that's what the sorceresses pull him into and cause a lot of trouble for him and Ciri and on and on. But the experience that you have when you're playing the games, you're doing all these side quests essentially of like, these people need help from a noon wraith that's bothering them. It's basically the same thing that they did translate. I think that they did that very well in the show. Of it was kind of episodic, sort of monster of the week, but they were still very good stories. And those are the times. So he's the heroic on the small scale. He's the one who will go into the evil
We're losing you.
You're still lagging out.
That no one else is.
Sorry, we lost that whole section.
We lost like the whole sentence almost. That part.
Oh boy!
I just sent you.
Oh.
So on the small scale, it's very episodic. He's doing a lot of saving the town, saving the people, digging into some of those quests, like the Noon Wraith in particular.
My bad.
Like some of that comes from. If I'm thinking of that first town, it comes out of the evil of the villagers who created the situation from which the Noon Wraith showed up. So a lot of this is kind of still, even in the games, kind of this twisted sense of, you're creating a monster, now you want me to kill it.
I mean, sometimes, especially out of the third game, if you remember that the Baron, that he was quite an asshole. I think the storyline, I think, was called Family Matters. But I love that whole story of the thing. Like, he was a bad guy. He did bad things to his family, and now he is being haunted by it. But it's not just affecting him; it's still affecting his family and his villagers and everything. They're being haunted by a botchling, and so all of them needed to be saved, including like the Baron and the child. There's that method of being heroic on that small scale that saved everyone, including making the bad guy face what he actually did, in that sense of redemption, which is great for stories.
So in terms of the show. So I can't really ask Ben because he didn't watch the whole thing yet. But Alex and Justin, what's your your favorite character? Just Gerald or where are you at? For me, it's probably Dandelion.
Dandelion had, he has some really good moments, and his name Jaskier anyway, but
Jaskier.
But he veered close to being very annoying by being the mouthpiece of the writers, and that bothered me when it did happen. It wasn't as bad as it happens in other things, but like he's there I go, just delivering exposition again. It's like
does that happen a lot?
It happened a couple of times.
Wow.
I mean, it doesn't. It basically, I'm not sure it happens hardly at all in the second season, right? Because
it happened once, and that one was more egregious. Of when there's because he had supposedly written the song of the first season and everything, and that's how everyone knows all of the exploits. And there's that guard saying, I really didn't like how you did the 4 different timelines, and it was very confusing. And Jaskier is basically hearing all of the criticisms that they must have heard of people being confused listening or watching the first season, and he was being bitchy about it, of like, well, you go make your own thing, and they kind of tied it into his making a problem. But he was just the mouthpiece of the writers, and I don't like it when they do that. I do like other times when he's being a shithead, getting in trouble, and being like kind of snarky about it. But when he's just actually man up and break the fourth wall, or don't. I don't know. It was they don't get to use a character like that.
He's almost the only comic relief, right? Everything else is pretty serious most of the time, and I like all the Marvel stuff, which has quite a bit of comedy in it. So I don't know. Maybe it's just because he's the comic relief. Like I just love, like for example,
you cut him a lot of slack. Then you're saying
one of the I just really like. One of the episodes I just watched. Like he comes running in, and everybody's in like this kind of like big standoff. He's like, Gerald, like, oh, you're busy. Okay, yeah. And then he like pulls back, and he's like, I just love that like little lifting of tension, and the humor.
I like Dandelion better in the games especially because I really like Laszlo, and there's that kind of relationship between Dandelion and Laszlo that like I kept asking, where was he? Where's the other one? I liked him better in the games, but he was fine in the show.
I don't know the Danish actor they got for Vesemir. I mean, I've seen him in a lot of other stuff because he's Danish, right? But I feel like he's a little miss in this show. Personally,
he was fine. I think a bigger miss was Fringilla. I don't think that actress was able to perform that character the way that they needed her to, and so it always fell flat to me. Like basically up until the end, but she was kind of being carried by also murdering a whole bunch of people all at once.
She did the range look very well, but that's probably mostly makeup, I guess.
Yeah, but I'm just like the whole time, like I'm supposed to be thinking this person is, I don't know, powerful or scary. I mean, Yennefer did that far well. Tissaia did that better. Like some of the other ones, just like that woman, whether it was the actress or the direction, it could have been either one of them. But that character was supposed to be more intimidating, and she wasn't.
Funny thing about wizards, right? So they don't always look like badasses.
But she needed to present herself as one. That was her purpose. She was the scary bitch of Nilfgaard, and it wasn't working.
That's the the one that like uses Nightshade to freeze those generals. That woman, right? Yeah, she's kind of. I am very interested in the world building lore plot line about how Nilfgaard went from nothing to this powerful nation. We still haven't really gotten that, I think. Other than that, it happened. Like this is like we kind of follow it a little on the side in the first season as we do these different time jumps. How Nilfgaard is powerful, then not powerful, and how that happens, but not what actually happened, and also, that big reveal in the end. I maybe don't want to say because Ben haven't seen it.
Ben,
you're muted, Ben. Ben, your microphone's muted. I can see the muted icon.
He's both muted and deaf.
there's a bit of background. No, I am a spoiler phobic, so if something is worth watching, I'm not worried about spoilers. You just stay.
Okay, so the big reveal in the end is that the leader of Nilfgaard is Ciri's father.
Oh yeah,
That's
that comes,
why they've been
comes up in
hunting
the games.
the whole time.
Yeah, that comes up in the games. Then, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if
So
you were
I'm
that
interested
into the
in-
lore as you were, I figured you already know anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm quite interested in that plot line at least. I'm interested in the justice at the world, but the spheres, the obelisks, the more of the nature of Ciri's power. I like Dandelion. I like Geralt. I think Yennefer is meh.
A giant bitch, and it's fine for her to be a giant bitch. That is what her character is, that she always was. So in that way, they're performing her very well. But this is why we chose Triss instead of Yennefer, because she's a giant bitch.
Yeah. Right. I mean, that's a fair analysis. I think
She's a
Yennefer
traitor.
is.
Fuck Triss.
Triss?
Uh,
I mean, so Triss in the game versus Triss in the show is pretty different, and I'm sure that's different even from in the books. Because again, I haven't read them, but Triss in the game, she was. I mean, I was actually asking, what was her worst quality? I think she's naive, maybe, but she's just friendly. She's happy. She's capable. I never had an issue when she was around. Versus Yennefer, sometimes was annoying, but I mean that was trying to be part of her charm, and that can
This
be
is all
okay.
this is all movie game talk now, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Triss was she was fun. I wanted her around, and therefore, when it was this choice of like, did the genie's wish mean everything, or was there something real behind it? And it's just like, nah, let's go with Triss.
I think one of the problems that the game developers wrote themselves into a corner with is that I think Yennefer only shows up in the third game, and I think maybe she's mentioned once in like a DLC pack for the first game. But the first two games, they have Triss instead, and Triss is basically Yennefer's character. And so they kind of have to split them off when they finally make room for Yennefer and Ciri in the third game.
So I suppose in terms of the role of the fact that she's the sorceress that's hanging around him, I could see that being Triss is doing Yennefer's character, except their personality is so wildly different. Of that one is mean and prickly, and the other one is nice and friendly and happy.
And a traitor in the show, apparently.
But she's,
are you saying that just because she went to Tissaia?
They're both traitors, yeah. She went to say it was like all blabbly about Syria, and now it's everywhere.
I mean, it's choosing to divulge things to Tissaia. I wouldn't say that's a betrayal on Triss's part. It's more of a betrayal on Tissaia's part. Ciri.
I would say.
Also, the complication of how they're using the sorcerers and stuff in the world, right? They're, not apolitical, but they're still. It's like more like hyper political, but in the strictest sense of like
they're Illuminati political, right?
Yeah, right.
So they're the Illum. So yeah,
it's not a betrayal. They're playing to their own. I mean, sure, yeah, I'm sure Nilfgaard considers it a betrayal or whatever, but they're not supposed to have allegiances truly to their nation.
You know what they are? They're basically the Bene Gesserit from Dune.
Right? Sure. But that's what makes Fringilla's character so scary and dangerous to the rest of it, right? Is that they're loaned out. They're not supposed to they're not supposed to go native. They're not supposed to be local, but she decides to choose Nilfgaard over the rest of the council or whatever. The
Brotherhood, I think they said.
Yeah. There you go.
I feel like the whole logic of the world signs also kind of broke down a little. Okay, the portals kind of make up for a lot of that. But there are points I noticed in these last couple episodes where Geralt seems to be traveling vast differences in the blink of an eye. I guess we're just time skipping. He's like traveling really far, and he has no access to a portal. So but yeah, that's kind of annoying.
Quick travel function on the main menu.
Yeah,
that's where Roach's supernatural ability comes in.
You arrive on a roof. Is that how it works? You fast travel and then you're standing on a roof with Roach.
I love that game. I don't think it's that buggy, is it?
I mean,
it's a
you
meme,
can
I don't know.
It's a meme, and you can probably break it if you really, really try. But
sure, it's CD Projekt Red. I would say never change, but kind of please change.
They already changed is the problem.
Yeah. Come back to yourself.
Did you see the whole Cyberpunk fallout, Ben? Like they changed.
I did, yeah. The whole T-posing, right?
Well, they just that is now Exhibit A for overpromise and underdeliver. So,
there's also isn't the same year Hello Games had its No Man's Sky?
Oh no, but they overpromised, underdelivered, and
they eventually did deliver.
It.
They just couldn't do it on timeline.
Basically fixed it.
No Man's Sky has definitely got a redemption arc that Cyberpunk quite hasn't landed yet. So
they've done some patching, but still haven't. As far as I understand it, it's still quite buggy and quite lacking in a lot of the stuff that was supposed to be there.
Right. Yeah, like I definitely had a friend that basically was doing the countdown and was there for every false start and everything, and then finally, he was one of those that like got his money back because he was like, this is not even remotely close to what we were promised. But yeah.
Oh well.
No Man's Sky was the other one, but like it was so easily forgotten because it was like the difference is like No Man's Sky, like that was pretty much their first game, wasn't it? Or it was one of their only major releases or something. But like CD Projekt Red is like they
had a couple basically small Flash games equivalent.
Right.
It wasn't a Flash game, but it was that kind of gameplay.
Right. Whereas CD Projekt Red was like the gold standard for a little while. So.
I don't think any of us can really answer Cody's question in chat because I don't think a single person here has read the books.
Well, the vampire character, if he's the right one from Heart and Wine, he was fun. I would like him to come back. He was very fun.
Are the vampires...
Philippa. There are high vampires. So lots of them are just crazy monsters, but there are ones that are like the classic scary romance type.
More human vampires.
Yeah. And I forgot his name, but he was a good companion to have in that DLC. I was really excited to see Philippa in the show, especially in the way that they were highlighting it, but she was so scary in the games to only get 30 seconds of her at the end of just nothing. It was very disappointing, and I'm hoping that they kick her up a lot more because she was like the main antagonist of the second game, at least in my opinion, and very scary when we came across her again in the third one.
Oh, I just thought she was some henchman thing.
No, she was super powerful. From the Lodge Sorceresses, she was like running games around them, and she was basically half the reason for the second game to have happened.
Yeah, no, Cody, I don't think anyone's read it.
As he moves away from the mic.
I was going to get. I tried reading this, but it's really bad, so I stopped.
Tried reading The Witcher.
Yeah, the first one here, The Last Wish.
Well, it's kind of funny you mentioned that because I've seen some of that too, which is part of why I didn't bump it up to the top of the list, even though I love the show and everything like that. Is that the books seem to present really cool ideas, but not necessarily deliver on, like it's not like amazing literature. It's just he sets up a really good world, he explores it decently. But again, like the books kind of suffer the same criticism I mentioned earlier, almost like, or it could be a criticism, which is, we're focused on just this dude. Like it doesn't actually get into, any of the machinations or any of the tantalizing stuff that's set up, and so,
that's kind of the point, right? That's just this exhausting world where there's a lot of, almost like Game of Thrones. I don't really know the concept of Game of Thrones, but it seems like it's Game of Thrones from a, from the ground level perspective, and all of that stuff doesn't end up. All of that stuff ends up crossing into your personal path sometimes, and then you're just kind of the exhausted wanderer moving through the world. Despite that, there's all this stuff happening around you, and I don't want any of it. That's why I think Geralt makes such a good perspective character. It lets you move through the world without being mired in court politics, although sometimes he does get wrapped up in it. I mean, does that seem a bit far-fetched?
No, yeah, I mean, certainly the ability to move around and see it and that sort of thing, but at the same time, like, it's like walking through a buffet. kind of fucking pointless, right? You know, like that's great that you got to move through and you got to see the grapes and the watermelon and the assorted meats and you know the hot and the cold foods and the ice cream, but you didn't taste any of it. So you know that like that's kind of the thing. It's like, well, that's all well and good, but like, you know, not getting mired into some of these machinations and some of what's going on in the story, like, you know, there you could make an argument a similar way about Firefly to bring that up. You know, we'll peel that scab right back off for all of you guys 20 years later. But, you know, it's the same kind of thing in the sense that like they used to be involved in politics. They weren't. Now they're privateers and stuff. But they in the movie, they get wrapped back around and actually get involved in the world again. Whereas like so far as we've seen in his case, mostly he just escapes in the nick of time. You know, like he doesn't have anything to offer to the wider story. And I think that's part of the frustrating part, maybe. You know, it's like walking through a buffet. You got all the smells, you got all the sights, you're salivating, but you're not going to get the release because he's not that guy. He's not that character, you know?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I just know that. I don't know what the problem. I don't really remember what the problem was with the books. To be honest, it's just.
I wonder how much of it is also the fact that it's a translation for any one of us, because I don't think any of us are fluent in Polish.
No. Yeah. That's also a thing, right? That's they're all written in Polish and then they're translated to English, and yeah. And the first one's really old. I think Cody said 30 years.
Is that really old in terms of books?
In terms of writing style, you know, Wheel of Time. That's a Wheel of Time old, right? Like, and fantasy's got.
I have books that were published in the early mid '80s, and they still feel very.
This podcast is a spinoff of the Dresden Files podcast, right? Wasn't that book from late '90s?
I think it was in the early 2000s.
I think
last year was
20 years, so 2001.
Yeah.
Okay.
So 2020 was.
Yeah.
Well, it's Ender's Game old then. It's Ender's Game old.
It's like, you know, Dune, for example. That's also kind of hard to read.
Well, Dune has its own problems.
I don't think that's because of its time period.
Yeah. Dune is probably the single most influential sci-fi or fantasy novel this side of the Lord of the Rings, but it has its own problems. It has very strengths, but
another book series I would probably never read again. Lord of the Rings. I would reread The Hobbit though.
Well, yeah, and until you get to
that from stream. How do you read The Hobbit? The Hobbit spends like 30 pages talking about where the fucking dwarves put their cloaks on a hook. But you'd reread that over the Lord of the Rings? Like, yes. Give me a break.
There's a charm to it.
No. What charm? Like
The Hobbit?
No, I'm saying that specific thing. Fine, the Hobbit as
overall,
book
as a whole
fine,
is way more digestible and fun to read than what I remember about Lord of the Rings. Yeah, maybe that's a good book.
There's nothing wrong with that.
I mean,
I'm just saying
that's
why it's digestible. So porridge is more digestible too, but then because it's got a reason for being there, right? So like.
I'm kind of over Grimdark.
Why?
Okay.
There's definitely good Grim. I just finished a book that's called The Emberblade. That's kind of grimdark. It's like very classic fantasy, but with a more realistic grimdark spin, but not too grimdark. And I think the realism and the grimdarkness into that was actually quite good. As long as it like skirts the line, right? It can't get too fucking depressing. Then it's just like, why am I reading this? It's like everything from Joe Abercrombie. It's hella interesting characters, and they're all kind of assholes, and then cool, like interesting world, and the plot is almost third to whatever's going on, and they're just like really good. But they're considered grimdark, right? But I think they're like the good kind of grimdark, and the best grimdark books.
I think there's a lot. I just don't think that grimdark is reflective of reality, and I don't mean that I only read nonfiction or I'd only watch nonfiction. I think that the atmosphere of entertainment should be something on the more hopeful side. It doesn't have to be, and so that's, I think, part of the popularity of the original run of movies in the MCU. There's a, beat the bad guy up, but on I think what's great about Lord of the Rings is that it has that hopeful spin while also not avoiding the cost of trauma. So I think that maybe this is part of the larger conversation we've had over a couple episodes about whether you can only ever have stories without conflict, and that would be stories which are, where there's good people, virtuous people to root for. I think you can have a hopeful story that is more reflective of the real, again, the moral universe in which we live, which plays to the strengths of real characters suffering real trauma, but nonetheless doing the great deed, pouring their whole selves out for this this great moment, for this great cause, perhaps even because of a great friendship. And I think that's what also attracts us. That's something that's attractive about the Dresden Files too. That's what was attractive to me about it. Not everyone has to be Michael Carpenter. You can have a Harry Dresden, but there's still a real good in the world, and there's a real cause for real hope. So I don't know. Maybe I'm rambling. I guess I'm rambling.
Well, I think it's all well and good, but I think it's a difference between idealism and nihilism, right? Like neither, I think, are the total sum of what the universe is, but I read them for different things, right? I do traditionally like my fantasy to be high heroic. Certainly I don't want to play in a D&D game where it's like every third session you're rolling up a new character because you're just getting murdered all the time. That's not very fun for me. My superhero stories, generally I'm there for the heroes, right?
Sure.
So I don't quibble so much with the weak villains, because that's the point. The villains are supposed to lose. But there is some good stuff about Grimdark as well. I don't necessarily relish and roll around in the whole the universe is at war and it's never gonna end or whatever. Like, for me, the Grimdark, again, the nuggets there are the characters like Geralt that are trying to do the right thing despite the fact that their planet is a shithole, or at least the people in their planet.
And Geralt is at least avoiding evil, right? Between two evils, he'll not choose. He's resisting the evil. Despite being an anti-hero, his main compass is don't do evil. It's the Hippocratic Oath.
Well, yeah, anti-hero to me, it doesn't necessarily mean that he occasionally does the wrong thing, necessarily, but he doesn't always do the good thing, that's a difference, right? Like, Batman doesn't necessarily go and just he doesn't just go and hurt people to hurt people, right? Sure. Just the violence is part of stopping them, but he also doesn't always go out of his way to stop everything. Obviously, newer Batman's, he's Mary Sue to the point of he could stop Superman. Why? Because we wrote it. Type of stuff, right? Where it's he can even beat Superman. He can beat everybody on the Justice League, depending on who's writing and if he's got enough prep time, right? That's the meme that he's turned into. Whereas classic Batman, he's not trying to fix the world. He's trying to fix Gotham City. He's trying to make the streets a little bit safer, and probably even realizes that he's part of the problem, but he's still also kind of the only solution. And, that echoes a little bit what they say in Dark Knight, right? With the whole, he's not the hero we need, he's the hero we deserve, or whatever, So yeah, anyway, that, Geralt to me is an anti-hero because at no point has he put his line in the sand and challenged all comers. At no point is he rallying the troops. At no point does he particularly seem to be going out of his way to help anybody. But, he will help in the moment. He will do the least amount of evil in the moment, that sort of thing. He doesn't just take people's word and their coin and go kill a monster. He's got to find out, well, wait, why are you a monster? Or, are you eating these guys because you've been provoked, or they've starved you out, or, whatever the case may be. Anyway.
One of the things I like about the focus on monsters in the Witcher lore, maybe to change topic, is that it focuses on what constitutes being a monster.
Sure.
And this is part of the things I get from Joseph Anderson's thing. Again, really watch that video. I know it's a long one, but if you don't want to play the games, watching a 5-hour video is easier than trying to find time to play a game because you mostly just listen to it. But so the whole point of the lore in his view is that there are multiple kinds of monsters. Some are just basically animals; they're just beasts, and some are people, so intelligent who are malevolent. Sometimes there's evil spirits or evil entities, and sometimes there's intelligent creatures who aren't monstrous, who aren't actually doing evil. They're just kind of mischievous or trying to get by in the world. And sometimes it's people who become moral monsters. And just even the act of accusation makes someone a monster. The curse of the black sun being a self-fulfilling prophecy, that because you're convinced any girl born during the eclipse is going to destroy the world and are going to be monsters, you ostracize them, and by ostracizing them, they become monsters. That's that kind of element in the story is really fascinating to me. And I think there's a real truth to the fact that the more evil you do, the more you become like a monster, the more you become like even an animal, the less you're able to reason and see clearly, then the more you get mired in very, very gross things. There's a real debasement by doing evil and being around monstrous things, which I think is very true. A very true insight.
I think a very real thing, the point of the Witcher's books are that the humans are a lot of the time they are the monsters.
Mm-hmm.
And even especially when we get the more of the story from the elven point of view, we're just like how the spheres collided and brought monsters, they also brought humans who enslaved and almost annihilated the elves.
Right.
So yeah, it plays with some interesting things. And I'm gonna watch the next season, Justin. Maybe it'll be a 7 out of 10 then.
It's already a 7 out of 10.
It's a 5 out of 10. Maybe,
or better.
Maybe a 6 out of 10.
It's better than what I've come to expect from straight to Netflix shows, which tend to have this targeted, high concept, bad writing.
The Netflix shows
middling
are
execution,
hit or miss. Like they could be fantastic. Yeah. They could be absolute dog shit, and you don't know because mostly they're made by unknowns or random chances.
Yeah, right.
Or I was really something. They're trying to do experiments, which I want to encourage experimenting.
It's what decides.
Yeah, but is The Witcher experimental? Is the TV show The Witcher experimental at this point? Or, to what degree, I guess, is it following in and trying to chase the trend that Game of Thrones started? Highly sexualized prestige TV with some grimdark tones and some monsters and some, boundary pushing.
So it did do some experiments in the amount of supernatural that they were showing. Like a lot of the Game of Thrones, it's mostly people and expensive sets. And there was some monsters, like the amount of, say, CGI they needed for that it's not quite as much versus like to do the monsters correctly, which they did in the show. They had to spend a lot of brain power, a lot of time, and CGI effort to do that correctly.
Sure.
When they pulled it off. And so in that way, at least that's an experiment to see, did it work? And now others can do more in a similar line because once it started, it's going to create its own trend that way.
Yeah, I think the next kind of those high fantasy shows, I'm going to dive into Wheel of Time, and hopefully it will be a 5 out of 10 or better too. But I'm not. I've heard bad things, so but
have you read the books?
First a book and half the second one. And then I kind of
so you didn't particularly enjoy it, or you just found something else?
I thought the first one was an okay rehash of Lord of the Rings. It was kind of like a better Lord of the Rings, I guess, in a way. It was more interesting to read. But I don't know. They're hefty books, right? I think I just didn't want to read something that was high fantasy at that point, and I went and read something else.
Well, okay, then you can report back, but I don't know if you'll ever get me to watch the Wheel of Time show. I don't know.
No, I mean Lord of the Rings. I'm gonna watch that one. We could all watch that one. Talk about it.
I'm gonna watch it. So I already have some quibbles, but I think that's what they are, and I'm gonna give it its fair shake. So after actually having seen the trailer and whatnot, I was quiesced on some of it. So
the first trailer, I'll say I like the first teaser, but the SDCC trailer kind of turned me off of it.
All the trailer stuff has actually made me more excited, and I was very much like, this is not going to be good.
All I want to say is that before you criticize it, if you haven't read the 20 plus volumes of the Histories of Middle Earth, you don't got a leg to stand on.
Nobody was.
I think I made it through like volumes. 4 of them.
Nobody was supposed to read the 20 volumes of the History of Middle Earth. It's like reading the lore.
I haven't even finished this.
Would you read the lore of my model train set? That's what the Lord of the Rings is. After a certain point, it was an academic's model train set. It's great, but it's kind of a model train set, and it.
One of my friends who are like really into. One of my friends who are really into Lord of the Rings is kind of soured on it, but he told me he's like. Tolkien was asked like in a bar, so why didn't they just fly to Mordor? And he was, and his reply supposedly was, he's like, "Fuck you, that's why."
Yeah,
that doesn't.
I don't believe that story. Yeah. So yeah, that sounds like a meme. So
I mean,
I'd be happy for you to point me to the Tolkien Estate's official source on that one. So.
He seemed quite. I mean, he's like kind of a big fan. Like, he's quite convinced by it, but I don't know. We'd have to ask him.
Fans can be wrong,
right?
Yeah, being a fan does not make you right.
Look, I'm in the room with 3 of them right now, so
this guy's so factual. Like I don't know.
Sometimes the people who are most confident are the ones too dumb to realize that they're wrong.
I'll just be mean.
Hashtag relatable.
I'm just going to end this now before we
7 out of 10.